Welcome, y'all, to a Sharing the Path Zoom call. And let's start off with a prayer. So everybody take a moment to find some stillness. And just tap into what feeds you, what you connect with. And let's invite invisible support to be with us, guides, allies, intuition, infinite intelligence. Thank you to the invisible support that allows us to gather together well. Thank you in particular to those of Ra, who are such powerful teachers for our community. And thank you to those of us who gather in this way and in so many ways to share the path, uplift one another. So now, speaking of gathering in community, I invite us now to feel ourselves gathered. Feel us as though we're sitting in a circle together. So I'll take a moment to feel our gratitude for this circle gathered. We're coming together in this way. And thank you finally to the one infinite creator. Amen.
Amen.
So now a little context. How we run these calls. So this is Sharing the Path Salon series. And we have some guidelines. We have some cultural principles that we come together around. So one is to listen deeply to one another, to listen for resonance from what one another is sharing. Where is what is being shared resonant for you? Listen for that overlap, for that aliveness within your other self. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to agree. If what is being shared doesn't match your experience, another principle that we practice here is honoring free will. So giving space to your other self to have that perspective. And also giving space to yourself to have your own perspective. And then when we share our varying perspectives, we're not trying to convince one another of our perspective. So that being said, when Scott shares his presentation, he's going to be sharing what he's gathered on his journey and not telling us what is the truth for us to believe, right? that being said, if it resonates and, it informs something for you and you pick it up, great. Do that. And we do that through our own free will. And so when we share, the final principle is when we share, we're sharing humbly from our own direct experience. So in short, listening for resonance, honoring free will, and sharing humbly from our own direct experience. So thank you for practicing these ways together. Thank you for being together. And now I'll turn it over to Kent.
Thank you, BJ. So before I introduce Scott, I want to say something, just a general comment on why I feel it's important for me to study the service to self polarity. And to me, it's like shadow work, basically external shadow work. Our path in the law of one, those of us who follow the law of one teachings, is know yourself, accept yourself, become the creator. Now, we can look at that as knowing our individual selves. But in larger context, we're all one. And so know yourself can be looked at as knowing all of the creator. And the service to self-polarity is also the creator. And to me, they are the most difficult part of the creator to understand. But I want to understand them because they are part of self. They are part of myself. Since we are all one. And so that's why I find value in studying the service to self-polarity, because I want to understand everyone. I want to understand the entirety of the creator. And so that's the part of the creator that is the most difficult for me to understand. And therefore, I want to put a little extra effort into understanding that part of the creator so that I can know myself and accept myself and become the creator. So that being said, Scott grew up as a Catholic, and he was a practicing Catholic through his 20s to early 30s, I believe you said, right? And then at some point after that, you said 10 years ago, while you were meditating or after meditation, you had an experience of non-separation. Mm-hmm. And that was like a very pivotal moment for you, like an awakening moment. And after that, you began to search for spiritual material. And very quickly, you found the law of one material after that. So that was around 2015. Mm-hmm. And then one of the most interesting topics in the law of one material was the difference between STO and STS. So you began to immerse yourself in studying STS, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Scott, he's a veteran from the Air Force. He was in Iraq. What was that? What was that called? Desert Storm, Operation Desert Storm in Iraq as a fighter pilot. And he now works for the Gulfstream Aerospace Company in Savannah, Georgia, as a test pilot, which sounds totally badass to me. Anyway, and so he's going to give us a presentation today on what he has learned from studying the STS polarity. So welcome, Scott. And
okay. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
And before we get started, West, I've sent you a request to share I put together a handful of slides here. I don't know if it's working or not.
Cool. I don't see any slides yet.
Well, I share desktop. Hold on. There's
Did you
always
just
a
make him
technical thing.
presenter? Does he need to be a presenter?
Yeah, now the I'm gonna have to
He is
log,
closed.
leave the meeting and come back in because it.
There was something else I was going to say. Wes and I first met Scott at the Philadelphia Coming Home retreat.
Mm.
And it was interesting when he walked in the room, I recognized him immediately. And I had to stare at him for a few seconds before I realized that I'd never met him before in this lifetime. But I knew him, which was an interesting experience. He was probably wondering why I was staring at him. But yeah, I just recognized him from, some past life when we have known each other.
Yeah.
And he's back.
Great. It's working now.
There we go.
Scott. And you're muted in case you're speaking.
All right, how's this?
Great. Now I
Great.
can
Yeah, we
see
can
you
hear
and
you.
I see your slides. Perfect.
Well, that was easy.
Mhm.
Let me get started again. Okay. We can cut this out later. Okay, little technical difficulties. I could have pre-flighted that, but that said, I don't know why this is doing this. I'm just going to leave it here. As Kent said, I've been working with the raw material for about 10 years, and everything is absolutely mind-boggling. Every single session, every single question. I don't even know where to begin. I started to connect it personally in current events, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But the key thing here that I kept taking away from is that this idea of separation is a choice that we make. It's not the choice of service to others, but service to self. But we're here on purpose to do something, and we need to find what resonates with us. And it's interesting that with all of my studies and then getting onto the Telegram channels with West and Kent and everybody else, we start talking about politics just because of current events. And then the two of you asked me, to me, it seemed random, but everything's serendipity, right? Hey, can you talk to us about what you're seeing with all these service to self people? Because one of the things that resonated with me is what makes these people tick and why would somebody want to do some of the things that I've seen done. And most everything I'm going to talk about here that are specific examples are going to be firsthand. I don't know if we'll be able to get to some of the nuts and bolts. It can be kind of shocking, so I'm going to try to stay at a philosophical level if I can, but I'll have some specific examples, and the reason for those would be point back to the idea that service to self also exists. Otherwise, service to others couldn't, and they need an opportunity for harvest as well as we do. So, with that said, I'll get started. Move this thing out of the way. As Wes said, and as Kent said, don't take my word for any of this stuff. It's just my opinion. It's my beliefs. The only thing I would recommend people do is as you start to contemplate or continue your own meditation and contemplation, question your beliefs. Don't look for things that validate them or confirm them. Look for things that prove them wrong. And especially if you find something uncomfortable in your experience, run towards it. That's where you're going to find what you need to find. So with that said, everything else you see here is just me jabbering and you guys being willing to listen. So thank you again. And thank you, West and Kent, for the serendipity. I've been wanting to actually put together a paper on this for a long time, but I never did it. Sometimes it's hard to keep this in mind. Without belaboring it, here's what I'm going to talk about. Some of this I hope is review for everybody, but I know in my case, I need a constant reminder of what's going on in this world and try to put meaning behind it and try to take responsibility for it without any negative feelings. We'll talk a little bit about the veil and how that creates self versus other. And the fact that the reason none of us agree on the truth and none of us have really found the truth is because we have to be motivated to go look for it. Anything that's spoon-fed to us is by definition not going to be the truth. At best, it'll be what somebody else believes. And in some cases, it's not what they believe, it's what they want you to believe. I'll spend some time talking about polarity and the various aspects of that. And then we'll dive into the service to self methods. But you can see it boils down to divide and conquer. And like Sun Tzu talked about, deception, distraction, infiltration, humiliation is part of that. And then hopefully, well, I expect to have some time for discussion and questions as we go through here. I find this hard to wrap my brain around without some and take responsibility for it, because that's what is being asked, to take personal responsibility for it without some sense of guilt or inferiority. But when I read this, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. So the first couple of times I went through the raw material, there were a couple of things that really resonated with me in terms of specific words that they were defining through the discussion. The first one was purity, and it kind of came up as a sidebar because it was in session 5 where the questioner wanted to know how one might become a healer. And the answer came back, well, it's the purity of the personality, and purity, let's define that as, they used it, and you see further down the page there, patience, impatience was an example of polarity that they gave. And they said, when you find in yourself impatience, look for its level opposite, which would be patience, that far out on the opposite end of the spectrum. And then they talked about, everything is a complex of polarities. Patience, impatience doesn't exist in a vacuum, just like male and female. And they went on to say, every male is also female, every female is also male. It's just your personality for any given, I guess, topic, like patience, impatience, male, female, kindness, cruelty, you fall somewhere on the spectrum of that at any given time. But in general, a personality falls somewhere over an extended period of time. And what they were trying to say was, you need to accept that all of it exists within you. And you need whatever your bias is, one way or the other, you need to accept that the other side of that is a part of you, and internalize it. And I think that was the key word. And by internalizing all of these polarities, you start to unblock your energy centers, and different polarities of different types live primarily at certain energy centers, was the way I understood this. And then balance is when for a given energy center, you have internalized all the polarities that have an effect on that energy center, whether it be red, orange, yellow, etc. And then it circles back on itself, and purity of the personality or of the mind, body, spirit complex occurs when you've balanced all those energy centers by accepting the full spectrum of all the polarity as yourself. And easier said than done, I suppose. This was an answer to another question in a different session, because Don was surprised with a personal experience he had that seemed to be of a very negative nature. So these aren't questions I'm going to try to answer for you. Write them down, review the video, whatever, but I'm going to try to pique everybody's interest. But my understanding from the law of one is, and the raw contact is, this is what we're here for in third density, is to make a choice. And the biggest mistake we can make is to muddle around in the middle. Related to this, they also pointed out that all paradoxes are resolved at the sixth density. All polarities are basically eliminated or at least accepted into the self. So how does it all start? This is a drawing. Actually, it's not that old, but it initially related to Rome and the world. That's what it says in Latin at the bottom. But it kind of reminded me of the veil, and that this personality over here lives inside a bubble with a physical world and space time, knows that there's something going on in the outside, but has no possibility of understanding it. And even most of the stuff that goes on in my daily life or anybody else's, when I contemplate how much I really understand, I always get back this answer, and it always says 3%. And I don't know why there's a specific number there, but what that would mean is 90% of every event in my daily life, I have no clue what it's about or what it's for. And also, if I were to be able to peek a human head and right hand outside the veil, it probably wouldn't be a me still. But anyway, I like the picture. So everything starts with us creating a self and other. And I didn't necessarily get this from the raw contact, but it's certainly from everything now is the study of one. But me is just everything with which I identify. I'm a man, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a test pilot. I ate lunch today. Is lunch part of me? It's basically, it's all just a very nebulous gray line of things that I find that I like to think of as part of me or part of my life, and things that are the opposite of that. Oh, that's not me. I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want that to be part of me. And of course, we find out, contemplating myself, that there's a lot of things in me that's not true. It is something I identify with. I just don't really want to acknowledge it. And basically, other is everything else. And then once you have a self and another, you start to have this idea of survival. And that's really what I think life is all about. It's just surviving and reversing entropy. And survival boils down to keeping that self-identity, whatever it happens to be. And for every human, it includes a body, right? Among everything else that maybe we need to perpetuate the body and the personality. But not just perpetuate, but try to keep things unchanged, or at least changing at a slow enough rate to where we stay comfortable with it. Every now and then things change at a rapid rate that we don't like. So there's lots of different tools we can use to think about this, but when you consider the law of one, and then you look at the catalysts, you have to come to the conclusion, or at least I came to the conclusion, that everything that happens in life, every thought, every emotion, and well, not every emotion, those are, I would call those experiences, but every event that I perceive as being outside of me is neutral until I react to it with biases, beliefs, fundamental beliefs. And I spent a lot of time a few years ago just pondering all of these in the way that Ra recommended. And every time I pick it up, I get a different feeling or sense from it. And the key point that's relevant for this conversation, once it becomes a conversation, right now it's just me talking at you, but is that everything in life is on a knife edge, and it can flip over to one extreme of any polarity or the other, especially in the key one of making the choice of service to other versus service to self. Every catalyst can be used by everybody for every choice. And then all of those choices are for the mind, body, and spirit are encompassed in each of these. And the point to take out of this is it becomes very, very personal. And and as you've heard before, it's a personal journey. Dewey B. Larson was the theoretical physicist. He was actually a chemist, but he got into theoretical physics. And then Don knew him and asked Ra about him. And he said, yeah, that's Einstein was, short version, Einstein was wrong. Dewey Larson was right about how to understand the universe. And space-time is basically our illusion. So the polarities are how we create a context wherein we can make these choices. And the key one of the service to others versus service to self, there's some generalities I got there: fear and its opposite, love, or the lack thereof, and then kindness, cruelty, deception. We could make a super long list and talk about it later. But the key is, how willing are you as an individual to allow the free will of others while you're on your journey towards service to others, or the opposite of that, service to self, which is very clearly oriented towards control of everything. And I'm about to get into why I think that is. Down here, you got all the personal ones. What motivated me putting together these slides and having this talk here was a political discussion I was having with Kent and Joanna, and we were the three primary ones. But I think I came across as somewhat agnostic on all of it, because I just see it all as catalyst. And yeah, I've got my opinions, all that, but I wasn't getting invested in anything one way or the other. And I think you guys found that interesting. So here we are. There's some keys to success in third density. All right. So one last thing I want to piece together to build a context here is out of the law one. They talked about what the requirements were for harvest from third density early on in the sessions. And harvestable service to others was 51 to 100% service to others. And harvestable service to self was their effort goes 95% towards themselves. And then you had this non-harvestable thing here. Now, I drew this with a normal probability distribution, which, presuming that there was no bias towards one direction or the other at the beginning of the human race, we would have almost half the population, if you combine this group on the left and this group on the right, as harvestable. But then Ra told us that the harvest will be small. And so I built another one where everything's skewed over here. So why is most of the human race over here? I'll go ahead and kind of lead the witness here based on what Ross said, is that we have in our DNA that of Mars, which obviously there's no third density life left there, and it doesn't look like things, it looks like it came to a violent end. Bellicosity, I think, is the word Ra used. And then, of course, you got the planet Maldek, which is a pile of rubble that we call the asteroid belt. So things didn't go well there, but all of that future social memory complex exists here on Earth too. So there's a bias towards bellicosity built into humanity. And then you have these people over here. We're near the end of the third major cycle and the end of third density, according to Ra, which means these people have had a lot of time to get really good at what they do. And one of the advantages they have, I'll get to later, but through the art of deception, they've moved people over into this non-choice region. And so we have this tiny little group here, which is still vastly greater. I didn't mean to make this one taller than this one over here, but you get the idea. But that's our ultimate choice there, that we're trying to choose into one side or the other. And they also said, even though this is 51%, the same level of effort is required, conscious effort, to go into this 49% as it is to go over into this 5%. And then you're going to have, what, 47% or whatever of humanity that's going to go do it again. There's some hope. Let's see how that looks. So I'll see if I can draw some pictures later here. I might just draw them on this PowerPoint slide. But what I've got is this line that's a continuum for any type of polarity is what I'm trying to talk about. And you've got a vertical scale here. And this first line that I draw here is F, because I'm drawing with a mouse, free will. And then the opposite of free will, or the opposite of, so let's get this right. Every individual entity, mind, body, spirit complex wants to exercise its free will. We all have an inner 3-year-old, right? So by free will, I mean the offering to other selves to exercise their free will. So the further over to your left, this vertical or this angled line that goes up to the left, it's kind of a straight line. Extreme service to others would have an extreme bias towards offering others the exercise of their free will, regardless of the cost to self. And then the opposite of free will is control of others. And so you get this straight line. And then when you get down near harvestable service to self, it kind of goes asymptotic because, well, that's just the way they are. And maybe this one does too over here. My personal opinion is no, because at some level, there's still an entity there that realizes that if it doesn't survive, then it can't be of service to the creator. So I think over here, there's going to be a limit. The question is, how do we recognize that in others without judging them as an individual? Or causing us as service to others to depolarize by judging them or judging ourselves in our effectiveness. This is a mathematical concept called sinks and sources, but I'll leave it to you to decide. The idea is, from a personal point of view, though, is if you realize that there's only one thing in the universe, then that means you're also the source of everything in the universe. And the way I imagine somebody like this is a guy, not Pollyannish, but just life just seems to always go his way. And whether he works hard at it or not, He always seems to get what he needs. And if he had some kind of a personal challenge, he just kind of takes it in stride. And it's like, oh, well, I'll just be persistent and keep working on it. The sync, in addition to being the opposite, as everything exists on the outside of me and I need to take it in to survive, they open their eyes in the morning, and all they see is a big, bad, dangerous world out there, and I have to get stuff to make me safe. But at a higher level, at a mental and a spiritual level, they don't think they contain anything. There's just this small little thing in a big bad universe, and if I could bring it to me, or control it at the very least, to the point where I could bring it to me on demand anytime I thought I needed, then that's the sync. So start to getting into what makes service to self tick. And there's two distinct part of this. I cut out a whole bunch because I didn't want you guys to read a whole paragraph. But the idea is, when I see self and other, and as STS, and I don't really care about other, it's all just a tool or a means to an end. And that includes other conscious entities, other 3D conscious entities like myself. They're just tools. Okay. And in order for me to love anything else, I have to make it part of myself. And since within the illusion, within the underneath the veil, it looks like it's over there and I'm over here, then my most practical means of doing that is to control it. The other more or deeper side of that is service to self, because of that love of self and this need to bring everything into me, and how important I think I am, how smart I think I am. I need to make more mind, body, spirit complexes that think and act like me. Now, I need to control them, but I need to make people that are like-minded. And so when a fourth density gets a third density, mind, body, spirit, to harvest service to self, they actually get the power of that harvested individual, as well as anybody else, to whatever degree they get them to polarize or get control over their decisions and their work towards making the choice. So I've kind of talked about some of this stuff. In my contemplations, I see a me versus the world. Best way to make that happen is the separation is real and it's threatening and life is cruel. And so when I have a separate self, and an inherent property of life is, and you see it in every part of the animal and plant kingdom, at every level of, let's say, development, in second density and third density, survival is basically the day-to-day modus operandi. I need to perpetuate this body. And I'll use force if necessary. That's very expensive and very dangerous. So when you get to third density and you have that much more intelligence, then you start to use things like deception to try to convince people to do what you want, while them thinking it's themselves making the decision. Ultimately, they have a bias towards that which is not. That's a paraphrase of Ra. And ultimately, when they harvest a fourth density, they have completely denied the green ray, and somehow they're able to balance all of their energy centers by basically zeroing out the green ray. But at the third density level, they focus on that separation and that need to own or control or take into myself everything that I come across. And so it's all driven by fear, which is driven by seeing the separation as real. You can look around the internet and find all kinds of pyramids like this, and hopefully I have time to talk about it because I want to go to discussion. But there does seem to be a general top-down organization in which things happen in certain orders. But in general, what I'll say is hierarchies with a demand for complete obedience is their primary method of operation. And then the subordinate methods, I'll get to in a second. But the key of that, well, let's ponder this for a second. I haven't called anybody a bad guy yet, so I'm hanging in there. We'll talk about service to others here first, because I think this group is going to see that quite clearly. Rod did say it's a more efficient path to harvest, and it's like, duh, you just get up in the morning and you be nice to people, even if they're not nice to you. But it boils down to cooperation. You go work at a company, you do something, you have a project around the neighborhood, you just cooperate with each other because you have a common goal. And even with differences, all those differences combine together to create one functioning of whatever grassroots group it is that you have going, whether it's just, two neighbors putting up a fence, or helping somebody pick up something heavy in the grocery store, or letting them go down the aisle first, whatever it is. We could come up with a million of the most trivial things. But you can read the rest of the list there. But one key is no natural resources are required, other than you're here with a body in 3D, and you just realize that the other self is no different than you. And a simple act of kindness requires zero resources. It just requires a little bit of space and time. Service to self, on the other hand, I'll start at the bottom. This is the hardest part to wrap, or for me to wrap my brain around, was the inverted morality. What I find and what I found in my research is that at first I was like, how does somebody get to the point where they cross that line of behavior towards other people? The absolutely diabolical and despicable acts. And I started to realize, well, wait, that's my word for it, but I'm judging them as evil. Difficult not to, but from their point of view, that's the right thing to do. Because all they see is chaos. All they see is I guess, lack of order, and they see they see problems all over the world, and they think it's our fault because we won't just listen to them. And then when you start to get service to self at a spiritual level, not just a physical level, then they actually have to do more than just control your production or your behaviors, but your thoughts, and then also your life. And so that drives them over towards doing things that we're not going to go there. When it comes to organizations, keep in mind that as they infiltrate, I'm going ahead a couple slides, infiltrate and subvert healthy organizations, incompetence becomes a feature, not a flaw. With that said, they're very well organized. Remember, they're hopelessly outnumbered. And so and this is why hierarchies become their very nature, because even at a moderately polarized set, if you have one asshole in the neighborhood, everybody's going to know who he is. And let's say he is starting to polarize service to self. He's not going to be able to do anything towards further polarization because everybody's going to kind of ostracize him. And so he loses the opportunity to take anything from you, or to get you to get control over any of your actions, because everybody just stays away from them. So at a large, even if you get 2 or 3 in the neighborhood, it's still going to be a problem. Okay. And you could be kind to them without giving them anything. Realize, and that's where wisdom starts to come in, which we'll talk about at the very end. But that said, with their goal is total domination at the extreme service to self. In other words, the harvestable level of polarization. So they become very well organized because that's the only way for them to control a large, like millions, if not billions of people, is through organizations. They're very well funded. Because they're like-minded and they're a small group, they tend to stick together. And my opinion is across multiple generations and multiple incarnations. And they write stuff down, and they are very intelligent people. That's why they think they're better than everybody, is because in their experience, they think they're smarter than everybody. You know, kindness is idiocy to them. It just allows you to be more of a tool to them. And in my experience, all of this is true in the 21st century, in the Western world, well, in the Eastern world too. I mentioned some of this stuff. They're massively outnumbered at the polarizing extremes, maybe not 1,000,000 to 1, but 100,000 to 1. At the middle areas where people are starting to make the choice and decide, I'd say at least 50 or 100 to 1. Like I talked about with the example of the asshole down the street in the neighborhood, and that's a judgment. I mean, maybe somebody's just having a bad day, but I'm just trying to make an illustration that in order to control other people, you either have to that don't want that their free will would drive them to make a different choice than you want them to make, requires either force or deception. You have to think about that for a long time. The only way for them to violate your free will is force or deception. The other thing is infighting is inherent in that side, because everybody wants the higher up they go, the more power they get over others. And so, I don't know, you guys are maybe not camp, but you guys are all younger than me. In the 70s, you know, we only had one thing to play with. It was called outside. And, you know, we'd go find the boys would in the neighborhood find a construction site with a big dirt pile. And then the king of the hill game was just, everybody, the goal was you're going to get to the top of the hill and stay there as long as you can. And everybody else was going to try to do the same thing. Well, that's kind of STS within all these hierarchies in a nutshell. And so there's always infight, and there's always breakup of organizations. And Ra talked about that. That's really what makes them more, well, I guess, less efficient on their path, because they tear each other apart. STO, we can tend to get Pollyannish and just inherently believe the best in everybody, that they all have everybody else's best interests at heart, because that's how a polarized STO thinks. And you just presume everybody else is the same until you start to realize that there's a polarity in hiding under this veil. And in the Eastern tradition, they call it duality. You can't have hot without cold. You can't have up without down. You can't have good without evil. But as Ross said in session 1, you know, when all polarities are resolved, you see that there is no good and evil. It was a motivation to choose, so that you could then more efficiently and more rapidly seek the law of one. It's getting really quiet over there. Is there anybody out there?
Yeah, we're here. We're listening.
We're here.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
All good.
We're
Okay.
yeah.
In the interest of time, you guys get this, okay? The key here is it's authentic grassroots, and that's why in order for you to be 51% polarized takes the same level of effort, or you only have to do 51%, 1% over no choice at all versus the other guys have to be fully 95% is because it's just inherent in a universe that's all one thing. A lot of stuff I found that's positive in the Bible, Ra cautions. There's also a lot of negative stuff in there, but they said once you start to contemplate or meditate and start to read it and really try to understand it from a service to other versus service to self, it's easy to identify. If you get a fearful feeling from something, that's negative information. If you get a comforting feeling from something, it's a service to others choice to follow that action. Obviously, the raw contact, but it's the same thing. It's a little bit of different context. They describe kind of like I'm trying to do what makes the other side tick and why it's necessary. Generations isn't really a book that has anything to do with spirituality in any given way, but it does a very good job of describing American culture, which I think everybody on the call is. And it was written in the early 90s by these two academic sociologists. And it talks about a recursive cycle of 4 generations that's happened since the colonial days. And we're at the end of the 4th cycle. So, and every cycle is 4 generations, about 80 to 90 years. And they talk about every one of these 4th turnings. You may have heard the term 4th turning. They are the ones that invented that term. And it's in the book Generations. And as a matter of fact, Howe, he's still alive, and he wrote a book recently. I think last year he published it called The 4th Turning is Here. But anyway, there also is a artifact in there with each 4th turning called a great champion. The first great champion of American history was George Washington. The second was Abraham Lincoln. The third 4th turning was FDR. And I'll give you 3 guesses who the great champion of the 4th turning is. Interestingly, Howe is he's a lifelong higher education academician. He refuses to give the guy's name. I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. And then we're going to move on. One thing that Strauss and Howe did mention, though, and that's why I put that book on this page too, is that the great champion is not a polarized figure in and of its own personality, one way or the other, at least publicly. What they are is polarizing. I got a chat. I can't see it. I saw something pop up, but I can't open it.
I said Elon Musk.
No. So what did the first 3 have in common?
They were presidents.
Okay. Remember hierarchy? Military is the best example because it's a hierarchy that demands and successfully commands absolute obedience to every layer and stratus below it, and it's very stratified. Like all right, I think I can. Well, these guys are writing for American, inside the American experience. All right, you're teasing me, man. So the military is the best example, especially when it goes to war, because there's no consideration at an individual level for your own personal actions. You're commanded what to do from above, or you're removed. And most people, interestingly, go in the military. I would say, vast majority are polarizing service to others. And that gets down here to this deception. We're told, oh, you're protecting your country. As a 17-year-old kid, I probably wasn't that sophisticated spiritually. I just wanted to fly jets. And so I did, and I wanted to be an astronaut. But then as I got in there, and things start to happen, like the Desert Storm experience is like turn on CNN, which was brand new at the time. It was the only 24/7 news at the time. And then I watched 20 minutes of CNN, and then I turn and look out the window, literally, okay, that's not happening. So that's when I first started to say, okay, things aren't what I was told they are. Most government agencies, most corporations, especially the multinationals and the banks, basically the longer it's been around and the larger it is and the more power it can exert on the culture and the society, generally the more STS infiltrated it is. Again, personal opinion. Problem, reaction, solution is one of the ways they operate. 9/11 is the best example of that. So somebody blew up the Twin Towers, and then 3 weeks later, we have a 2,000-page bill that has every possible solution that gets passed into law, called the Patriot Act. All right, that was a solution that had already been built, and we'll talk about by whom later, waiting for the problem to happen. So you get the horrific, the horrified reaction of the public, and then the solution. Oh, here you go. And then in the panic of the moment, everybody just goes along with it. So that's deception and manipulation at its peak, with the solution for more control, waiting in the wings for everybody to agree to. So nobody really, not very many people fall back against it. In other words, we agreed to it with our free will, at least initially. Distractions. Remember, I had that skew thing where you got most of the population, with its harvest being small, are off in no man's land relative to the choice. Sports, movies, that kind of stuff, social media. Just gets people to just not participate the way they're supposed to. Deception. I learned in school that, hey, the military is a good thing. We fought World War II. We beat some bad guys. We still need people. We got a Cold War going on, blah, blah, blah. Organized religion, especially the Roman Catholic Church. In the Western tradition, it's the oldest, at least the oldest one that survives, because they got rid of everything else. And then media, entertainment media, news media, science, higher education. Dewey Larson is that I mentioned above, that's mentioned in the Raw Contact. There are parts of the physical sciences that have been completely eliminated from any academic curriculum because its secrecy is demanded by the military industrial complex. So divide and conquer is what it boils down to. They do, because they're small, they own all these organizations. They are able to create the illusion that what they think and what others to think is mainstream, and so people go along with it without thinking. They create a narrative, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, and then wrap it up. This guy died like 2,500 years ago, so none of this is new. So he has some really challenging personal experiences, especially people that may be living in Western North Carolina for over the last year or 6 months or so. And this is hard to fathom. I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into, I'd rather have a discussion, all of this kind of stuff. But making us worried about foreigners. Look at all the wars. Iran, I could add that to it. China, the entire 20th century. And then, by the way, a war economy, if you're building bombs, you're not building electric cars that don't require any charge ever. Foreign aid is probably the most insidious and the most humiliating, and that type of thing. By that type of thing, I think in LBJ's term as president, that's the one I was born in. He started a war on poverty. How's that going? How many trillions of dollars have been spent? And we have more poor people than ever. So let's define the word help. Money printing, that's like a whole discussion on itself. I'm going to have to get away from. In the news media, you can actually find, with a little bit of search, not on Google, a thing called the 4 a.m. talking points. It ultimately, if you notice, you can turn on MSNBC and you can turn on Fox News, or you can turn on Newsmax. You ever notice they're all talking about the same topic on any given day for most of the day? This is where it comes from. They're just, so there are the most important thing in mainstream media is the stuff that they will never touch. All those various channels, all they're doing is editorializing in different ways. And that gets back to that. That's part of that divide and conquer thing that I mentioned earlier. You know, create this Hegelian dialectic, and you have extremes of opinions with this gulf of nothingness in the middle across which nobody can have a conversation. And then it divides everybody into these ever smaller and more numerous groups that each one of which can be more easily controlled because it's smaller and has less spiritual S2O service to other power. I have to swallow a lot of pride. I mean, I joined the Air Force willingly and then find myself in wars for 10 years that 30 years later, we're still, well, I think we're kind of wrapping things up. Narratives create an illusion of how the world works that hides the real motivations. I've got a drawing here. So there, at the very bottom of this, the military industrial complex, when you get into there, there's a certain amount of information that everybody has access to, and so does everybody that's not in the military. And then when you start to get into secret things, they start to put you into these stovepipe where you know what's going on in here, but you don't know what's going on here. And then cultures work the same, countries work the same. And then let me draw a circle up above here. Let's call it our budding social memory complex that wants to know the truth about how our world really works and what really motivates the entire spectrum of the choice. And then you've got all these different layers of things that it becomes a labyrinth of truth and falsehood. To use the news media as example again, so Fox News will say something that kind of blocks some person of the truth, so you can't get below that. And then over here, MSNBC kind of does the same thing, and they're all using very scientifically designed linguistics to attract people of certain biases one way or the other. And it all boils down to fear. But you know, so you get through the middle here, but then there's another group here where let's say there's shadow banning on YouTube or Google, that they won't let anything get out, and you have to find a way around that. And you can see how ultimately the real truth is, and the ultimate example of this is the secret space program, where nobody really knows what's going on. You got guys like Stephen Greer out there who's allowed to do what he does. Otherwise, he would have been shut down decades ago. And most of what he says might be true, but some of it is false. And the whole idea is that nobody gets to the real truth unless they're brought into one of these little stovepipes. Using fear and force is very expensive, and it's also very dangerous for the people that are trying to implement it. I'll come back to this if we have time, but talk about how it works. What I will say is, if you don't know where you live, you're down here with the 8.5 billion people. Most day-to-day narrative building is done through governments through the military, police, courts, education system. Organized religions are part of that program too. Roman Catholic Church being the best example. And then the news media, creating those narratives like I talked about. And then they all work together because ultimately there's only, in the United States, only 3 companies control all media. They also fit in corporations, and then you got central banks, governments, heads of state exist up here too. But ultimately, it's who's paying for all of this stuff. It's the central banks, and it's the taxing revenue systems of the governments. In the East, communist China, these 2 layers are inverted. Actually, these 2 layers, the government controls the corporate. They're all subsidiaries of the government, or just think of it as like a 3-letter agency, every company in China. And the think tanks, they're the ones that problem, reaction, solution. They identify, exacerbate, or create problems, and then they write reports in very serious sounding academic wording that then get implemented by the corporations and the governments with funding from the central banks. And then everything above that is actually hidden. There's a gap, and those people try their best to just be a regular Joe. Remember, it's all part of a plan. That's what I tell myself every 10 minutes. All right, so what's the way out? If you're polarized service to others, use your tools, honor free will. Remember, there's no mistakes, but there are surprises. And if one of those surprises pops up against you, learn from it and realize that if you do identify without judgment, that the group that got you into that predicament, or you allowed yourself to be the predicament in which you allowed yourself to be placed in, made you wiser. Forgive. Compassion always, help people anytime it looks like they need it. Realize that you're trying to pick up some wisdom as you go. And in my case, I have very little, and I just need to realize that I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to make a choice and take an action. And then here's what I'm trying to do today, at least for an hour and a half. In my mind, that boils down to try to help people understand that, at least from my perspective, the ultimate reason of third density humanity is to make a choice to serve others or to serve yourself. Pick one and start doing stuff. Go back, read session 67, specifically 67, 10, and 11. And the whole idea of the paradox is how do we get past this whole idea of there's bad guys out there.
Scott, I want to be sure to leave time for discussion.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Great.
Just a couple more quotes. This one's shorter, but the point is, as Ross says, we're just here to repeat the same information that's everywhere and always available. We just have a slightly different slant on it. By the way, this doesn't mean you have to invite somebody over for dinner that you don't think is going to be helpful on your journey. I found this picture on the internet, and we're not really talking about spiritual waking. Maybe we're talking about, I think what I'm talking about is polarizing towards service to others, or the other side, service to self. So this is kind of what it looks like most of the time. This might be what's happening. Alfred E. Newman. It was a comic book magazine when I grew up. I want to do one more thing and then we'll take a talk here. Let me see if I can.
Tea. I tea. I bet you thought I was drinking tea, but this glass is empty. You see that? There was no tea in there. And this.
Okay, can you guys see this video with the empty teacup?
Yes, we see it.
This isn't my hand. These are my hands. That's not real at all. You see, you're being lied to. You're being lied to. I bet you thought this was me, but no, this is just a reflection. This was all taking place on a mirror. It was all a mirror. It was all a lie. And I bet you thought I was wearing pants. I'm not wearing pants. And this isn't even my voice. I dubbed this over in post-production. And you're being lied to. This is all taking place on a screen, and you are being lied to. You're being lied to.
So have fun out there, but be careful. That's all I got.
All right. Yeah, that's great, Scott. A lot of very well researched and fascinating information. Thank you. I'm sure everybody appreciated it. Let's see, I'm going to turn my video on.
Okay.
There.
Yeah,
Okay.
thanks for putting all that together, Scott. Let's see, can you stop the share?
Oh,
Screen sharing?
stop sharing. Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Because you're seeing you, aren't you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
In
that was
infinity.
A lot of good information.
Yeah.
A lot to ponder.
All right.
All right. We have 12 minutes left, 11 minutes for discussion.
Yeah, it took
Yeah.
about an hour, I guess, and we had 15, 20 minutes at the beginning.
Yeah, right. So that's okay. Anybody have any comment that you want to make or question?
Josh.
Sorry
Josh?
for any background noise. Hi, thank you, Scott. That was great. I'm curious, at the secret space program, you mentioned Stephen Greer. Are you have you been following Jesse Michaels on YouTube?
I wouldn't say I'm following. I know of him and I've watched some of his stuff. But Stephen Greer stuff I've been watching for a long time because, well, I tell you what, short version, I got really close to being in there. You know, when I was 5 years old, Apollo 11, when I started kindergarten, they had just gotten back and they did go. The Indians have pictures they took a couple of years ago. And so I was always interested in that. And then when I got old enough and qualified to be an astronaut, I realized that nothing was going on. But about this, not long after that, I discovered him and or Stephen Greer and started following his work and know personally some of the people he's interviewed. And most of the people he's interviewed are actually what we call a limited hangout. It's just layers and layers and layers and layers of deception. But this stuff's been around since I'd say functioning stuff since the late 60s. And, you know, you read session 8 of the Rock Contact, they talk about it. So that's what I know.
Yeah. No, I followed Greer as well, and kind of in the past month or so came across Jesse Michaels and really like his stance. He is, you know, bringing people on the show, talking a lot, bringing forward a lot of the secret space program and also physicists and the technology. And but he's got a STO oriented kind of internal compass. So when someone comes on saying, you know, the end is near, he clearly, you know, doesn't buy into that or puts up some opposing viewpoint on that. So I really like him. Recommend it.
I'll look into it because Greer talks about, I mean, he tells people not to be afraid, but then he talks about, you know, all the fake alien invasion and all that stuff. Maybe it's kind of like my intention, which is, hey, just be aware that life isn't all a bed of roses, and that's intentionally so. So buyer beware. I'll look into them. Thanks, Josh.
Anthony?
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Anthony.
Really, hey, how's everyone doing? Um,
Great.
love the talk. It's the first time I've heard you speak, so I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the topic because it's something that I have pondered and thought about for many, many years. One thing I'd like to kind of unpack a little bit more, if you don't mind, is kind of the idea of service to self and kind of the mentality behind it. I think so often us on the service to others side, we have a tendency to look at the opposition or the opposite team and kind of look at what they're doing through a lens of condemnation in a sense. And it's very hard for us to kind of fathom or to wrap our brains around how it is they do what they do. And I would challenge us to maybe maybe reorganize how exactly what it is service to self. And what I mean by that is so often when we see the rapist and the murderer and the people doing all these violent actions, in the true definition of service to self, that would be a very wasteful exertion of energy. And a lot of times those individuals are usually service to others who are very hurt individuals that then go out and try to solve these pains and find themselves doing all kinds of things to try to resolve that. And individuals who have truly polarized, in my experience and in my discernment, in a service to self nature, are very hard to discern. A true service to self person could sit in this group and have a conversation with us, and we would not really know it if they were polarized at a level in which would be graduationable, if that's a true word.
I agree with everything you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I liken a lot of times service to self and kind of how I wrap my brain around it, because the hard thing for me in the beginning was how could they be aware of the creator and yet do all these other things? And what, through lots of meditation and kind of contemplation, what came to me, one is that they truly see themselves as the creator. And that is not wrong at all, because that is what we see. We see that everything as it is the creator, and they just reverse that. They know everything and see everything that we see. However, they knowing that.
You still there?
Lesser
Anthony?
versions of creator. Their job in that,
Your audio cut out.
I'm driving home. I'll give you guys. I'll chime back in after I go through this kind of hilly area. But I'll speak more because it's going to break out completely. So I'll chime back in later on in about 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. Aaron? Oh, hey.
I just wanted to say, Scott, I really appreciated that presentation. Here's my observation. I think it's incredibly difficult to go into this topic, to explore the topic of like what is STS, to go into like trying to understand the power systems of the earth, the negative control systems of the earth, and maintain a balanced attitude. Incredibly difficult territory, razor's fucking edge. Mm-hmm. And I think you did a great job. And I really appreciate this about your personality. I think you're somebody who's really, for whatever reason, just kind of geared for this kind of work. And I appreciate how you contextualize the whole talk. And I appreciate like your ability to kind of be balanced and have an even keel through the whole exploration. So thank you for that. Just a couple like little tiny contributions. Looking out into the world to understand ourselves in the greater sense. I love that framing. And I think it really brings into focus, in my mind, how important it is for us to become honest with ourselves, to ourselves, just as an entirely internal matter. I think if we're lying to ourselves, which most people do, we just learn to lie to ourselves, you just forget it. You're just like, you're kind of lost.
Most people really don't want to know the truth.
Yeah. Well, even in sort of small stake stuff, like even in the little ways that we fool ourselves about what we're up to. And anyway, so just the plug for the shadow work piece. I love that frame. And that was new for me to like, oh, the reason why you do this is a sort of like expanded version of shadow work. That's really cool. I appreciate that a lot. And actually, there's only a couple more minutes. I'll just keep it at that. There's a lot I could say. It's a really juicy topic.
Well, I want to connect your comment real quickly with what Anthony said. He said, hey, you got your your common rapist out there that I want to tie that back into my ideas of judgment and how hard it is to not be judgmental, because you don't know what that guy's motivation is. I mean, you don't have to condone the behavior. Matter of fact, in my personal opinion, you shouldn't condone the behavior, but you don't know why he's doing it or who he is or what he wants ultimately. And has he even made the choice, or is it just damaged goods?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Thanks. How about we go back to Anthony for just a minute and then we'll
Yeah, just for a second.
wrap it up. And
Hopefully you guys can hear me better now.
personally, let me just say a quick thing, right quick, just because we ended with only a very short time for discussion. It's fine with me personally if we go a few minutes past, half past.
Well,
If anybody needs to leave, feel
well,
free.
West, how about if we just invite people to drop off when they need to? Because I've got time.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of time. Maybe I would say 5 past works for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can pick it up on Telegram too.
Yeah.
That's where it started anyway.
Right.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, no. Just to complete the thought, hopefully you guys can hear me well.
Yes.
But what I was saying that in the very beginning, I'm kind of looking at this and being just trying to have some discernment between these two choices. A lot of times we see the middle path of the people that are kind of stuck in that sinkhole of indifference, and we categorize them as service to self. When so often these are service to others, individuals who have just lost their way and lost their path. And the point that I was making was that the service to self, if they're truly doing the work like we are, and they're fully aware of all the capabilities, the force, doesn't, choose one side or the other, or the creator doesn't choose one side or the other, then they have a full awareness of in a sense, what we would call the truth. And so what I was struggling with was how could they know that and fully be aware of that and yet choose to do what they do? And what I was saying earlier was that they truly see themselves as the creator. And they see all of us as the creator because they understand that, but they see us as maybe less intelligent or less dumber, or frankly, dumber versions of that portion of the creator. And they feel it's their right or their duty, in a sense, to write or put things into order. And a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but I believe that if a service to self person was someone that you meet on the street, a lot of times they would not be that angry, frustrated person. They would be very personable. They'd be like a politician. They would be someone you would at first impression want to have a drink with and want to know better, because that is the way of that path. And so that's something I would just want to put out there, is that I found that what was a hang up for me was thinking that the common criminal is the service to self individual, when through my own personal experience and through my own discernment, and I would love to hear other people's opinion on that. A lot of times it's the CEO or the politician or the person that you would invite over to dinner and do these types of interactions with, and even welcome into your home. And these are the type of people that are really on that path.
Yeah, and I tried to touch on that, kind of infer exactly what you're saying is everything boils down to deception. And early on, I used an example of a guy in a neighborhood who just comes across as an asshole. That's not going to be an effective service to other person, even if that's what he chooses. Everything is about deception. And
I would even challenge it further, that I would say that the service to self person is actually like the board leader for the community. They're the person that's organizing the parties, and they know everyone and everything about everyone. They wouldn't necessarily be the asshole, because you really couldn't influence people unless you're just power and you got a gun and you shoot anyone that comes around your neighborhood. But you'd have a lot more power if you were like, personable and know everything about everyone and knew what they liked and didn't like, and then you were able to kind of manipulate and move these things around. As opposed to the asshole on the end of the street who's probably a service to others, who lost their wife, 10 years ago, and now thinks the world is bad.
Well, this gets back to non-judgment, because you don't know why the guy behaved like that. Maybe he's not normally like that, but you're absolutely right. And I had that pyramid a couple of times. I showed the power pyramid, and the higher up you go, when you get the top 3 or 4 layers, they're not even household names, but they're the most service to self human beings you could possibly imagine. And if you have the opportunity to bump into one of them, they'll be the kindest, most polite, most well-kept, most well-read people you would ever meet. But if you're polarized service to others, you're just going to feel a big pile of goo. But to the average person, they're going to be, oh my God, I want to be like him. And yes, they absolutely achieve the highest level positions in corporations, in government, and in think tanks, and especially in the hidden think tanks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the only thing that I would point out, because I think so often we so a good example of, like, in my opinion, of a service to self would be like a Thanos, you know, or someone like of that nature. Because to polarize, to become an adept in any path, in the positive or the negative path, one must discipline the personality.
Yes.
And on the negative path, you must truly discipline the personality. To exert energy in a violent way that's not controlled at a time that's not of your choosing is depolarizing.
The
So
violence, violence has to look like. So remember, use the military for example. The guy who set in the policy, he's not doing any violence. He's got
Exactly.
the privates and the sergeants doing all the violence of their own free will.
Mm-hmm. You see, and that to me is that's the key difference for me, is looking into it from that perspective. But then it opens up the heart more, because then the rapist is not service itself; it's someone that's lost on the path. The murderer is not a service itself; it's someone who's lost on the path. Where the politician that we see on the TV screen that's that everyone's like, oh, this person's going to do all this great benefit and all this great good. Well, you know, history has shown otherwise, right? And so that's what, and society has taught us, in the way that we're programmed, to look at those individuals that are just harmed and hurt people, and look at them as negative individuals.
Yeah.
And we don't realize that we begin to glorify these truly service to self people. I mean, how many people you would talk, and I know this, how many people you talk to on the street, they'd be like, hey man, you ever seen Godfathers? Who's your favorite character? Right. And they'll talk about these characters in these movies, these serial killers, and glorify them. Oh man, this, that, and that third, right? But if someone in a family did it, or something happened, you know, they would condemn them. So it's all this confusion about behavior and actions, because no one's truly polarized. But when we become polarized in our decisions, you're able to look at that thing and go, no, that path is not necessarily something I want to glorify. Or you even, as most of us have on this call, you even stop ingesting those types of things.
Yeah, movies like The Godfather is a part of the purpose of that, is to normalize the violence. And I think West wants the microphone back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we?
Yeah. Let's we have Aaron's hand up.
Aaron.
So let's take a final comment and then
Right.
wrap it up.
Okay.
You're muted.
Aaron.
Josh dropped a link for anybody who wants to jump on and just keep
Yeah, we
rapping.
didn't get to
Thanks,
that.
Josh, for doing that.
Yeah.
So I
thank
just
you,
wanted
Josh.
to share one more appreciation. Scott, in your presentation, you talked about how, you know, a lot of souls who are polarizing the STS path are choosing to incarnate into these bloodlines that are these kind of unbroken power, you know, families of power, these lineages of like controlling families. I believe that is actually going on. And one of my personal frustrations in my life, in this incarnation, is how tremendously scattered the the positive path entities tend to be. You know, because they've gotten taken out over the years. You know,
Yeah,
like
you think that was done through connivance of the service to self hierarchy, to at least.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Yeah. And there's some folks who know that history, but how it lands for us in this, you know, in this time and place is that, you know, it's very difficult for a positive organization, just like you were saying, Scott, that has history, that is large and influential, to resist the infiltration.
Yeah, look what happened to the Boy Scouts. I mean, I was a Cub Scout as a little kid, and I can't imagine a better example of how to live a healthy, honorable life, and it's been completely wiped out.
Right.
But there's still the thing up there, so they still demand respect, but they've completely subverted any original goals it had for young boys and men.
Yeah. So anyway, just this conversation, this space, this this shared path, and this philosophy that we are able to all make sense of on our own and then share in whatever way we do, and then being able to look at this topic in this context is really satisfying to me because I often feel like an orphan. There's just like there are no like major home bases for like the law of one, studying the law of one. And so anyway, it's nice to be together in community with you all. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, PJ and Ken, for hosting.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me to do this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. That was really
Yeah.
awesome.
It's totally, yeah, it was a lot of good information, a lot to think about. And yeah, it seems like let's make this a series, like let's have more space for conversation on this particular topic because obviously it's resonant. There's a lot more to say.
I
And
would talk
yeah,
about judgment. I would dive into judgment of the self and others next. I had to gloss.
cool. Let's not open up
Yeah.
other lines of topic at this moment.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah.
maybe over Telegram. Anyone who's wanting to continue this conversation right now, click the link that Josh dropped and go over there. And yeah, I look forward to gathering again with you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our guides. Thank you for supporting meaningful, beneficial conversation. Thank you to the one infinite creator.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, friends.
Amen.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.